The wagon lurched over another rut in the road, and Clara's teeth clacked together hard enough to taste copper. She braced one hand against the splintered wood beside her, the other cradling the swell of her belly like she could somehow cushion the baby from the violence of the journey. Her father hadn't looked at her once since they'd left town. Just kept his eyes fixed on the horizon, jaw working like he was chewing on words too bitter to spit out. 3 hours. That's how long they'd been riding. 3 hours of silence so thick it felt like drowning. Clara tried to remember when he'd stopped being her father and started being this stranger who looked at her like she was something stuck to his boot. Was it when her belly started to show? When Mrs. Henderson saw her at the general store and gasped loud enough for half the town to hear? Or maybe it was before that. Maybe it was always there, buried under the surface, waiting for an excuse to come crawling out. Where are we going? Her voice came out smaller than she meant it to, smaller than she was. He didn't answer, just cracked the reins harder. The landscape had changed an hour back. The flat, dusty nothing of Dustwater Ridge had given way to something uglier, all scraggly brush and heat-drunk air that made everything shimmer like a fever dream. No trees, no shade, just sun and rock, and the kind of emptiness that made you feel like the world had forgotten you on purpose. Clara's back ached. Her feet were swollen so bad her boots cut into her ankles, but she'd given up trying to adjust them. Everything hurt now. Had for weeks, months maybe. She'd lost track of when the pain started and when it just became part of existing. The baby kicked, hard, and she winced, pressing her palm where the little foot pushed out. At least one of them still had fight in them. You brought this on yourself. Clara's head snapped up. Her father's voice was flat, matter of fact, like he was commenting on the weather. You hear me, girl? This whole mess, it's yours. I did everything right by you, fed you, kept a roof over your head, and this is how you repay me? She wanted to say something, wanted to tell him that she didn't ask for any of this. Not the boy who'd smiled at her with liquor on his breath and lies in his teeth. Not the shame that followed, not the way her body had betrayed her by growing and growing until there was no hiding what happened. But the words stuck in her throat like burrs. Nothing to say now, huh? He finally looked at her, and the disgust in his eyes was so naked it felt like being slapped. Figures, you never knew when to shut your mouth, and now you got nothing worth saying. Clara turned her face away, focused on the mountains in the distance, purple shadows against the bleached-out sky. If she stared hard enough, maybe she could disappear into them. Maybe that's where they were headed, someplace so remote that even memory couldn't find her. The wagon crested a low hill, and her father pulled back on the reins. The horses slowed, stamping and blowing hard in the heat. There, he said. Clara followed his gaze. Below them, tucked into a shallow valley, was a ranch, or what passed for one out here, a low-slung house that looked like it had grown out of the dirt, a barn that leaned slightly to one side like it was too tired to stand up straight, and a few fenced corrals where horses stood with their heads down, tails flicking at flies. Everything was the same sun-bleached gray, like the color had been baked out of it over years of exposure. A figure moved near the barn, tall, broad-shouldered. Even from this distance, Clara could tell he was big, the kind of big that made regular-sized men look like children. Her father spat over the side of the wagon. That's Rowan Vance. The name meant nothing to her. He's going to take you in. Clara's stomach dropped. What? You heard me. Her father gathered the reins again, started the wagon moving down the slope. Can't have you in town anymore. People talk. It's bad for business, bad for your sisters, bad for me. So I made arrangements. Arrangements? Clara's voice cracked. You sold me. Don't be dramatic. He said it like she was the one being unreasonable. Man needs help around his place. You need a place to be. It works out. I can't. The words tumbled over each other, panic rising in her throat like floodwater. Papa, please, I'll stay in the house. I won't go into town. No one has to see me. Enough. The word cracked like a whip. It's done. You'll do as you're told, same as always. But she hadn't, had she? That was the whole problem. She'd done the one thing she wasn't supposed to do. Let someone touch her. Let someone plant this thing inside her that was now ruining everything. And now she was paying for it. Would keep paying for it. The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the house. Up close, it looked even more desolate. Windows dark, door shut tight like a closed mouth. The man from before was walking toward them now, and Clara got her first real look at him. Jesus. He was massive, not just tall, but built like something carved out of stone, all hard angles and thick muscle that moved with surprising quiet under his worn work shirt. His face was weathered, sun-dark, with a jaw that looked like it could take a punch and not notice. Dark hair, dark eyes, and an expression that gave away absolutely nothing. Clara shrank back against the wagon seat. Her father jumped down, didn't offer to help her. She climbed down on her own, awkward and ungainly, one hand on her belly, the other gripping the wagon for balance. Her feet hit the ground and her knees nearly gave out, but she locked them, forced herself to stand. Vance! Her father stuck out his hand. The big man looked at it for a beat too long before taking it. His grip looked like it could crush bone, but his handshake was brief, perfunctory. This her? His voice was low, rough, like he didn't use it much. This is Clara. Her father said her name like it tasted bad. She's healthy, strong, can work. She'll earn her keep. Clara felt her face burn. He was talking about her like she was livestock. Rowan's eyes moved to her, a slow, assessing sweep that made her want to fold into herself. She waited for it. The disgust, the judgment, the way his face would twist when he really looked at her, saw how big she was, how ungainly, how ruined. But it didn't come. He just looked at her, took her in, then nodded once. She'll need rest, he said. She's had plenty of rest. Her father was already backing toward the wagon, eager to be gone. Like I said, she's strong. She's exhausted. Rowan's voice didn't get louder, but something in it changed, hardened. She'll need rest, food, a bed. Her father's mouth thinned. For a second, Clara thought he might argue, but something in Rowan's stance, the way he'd gone very still, very quiet, made him think better of it. Fine. You know the arrangement. I'll send word when... No need. Rowan's eyes hadn't left her father's face. We're done here. Clara watched her father's jaw work, saw the flash of anger in his eyes. But he just nodded once, jerky and sharp, then climbed back into the wagon without another word. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't look at her. Just turned the horses around and started back up the hill. She stood there watching the wagon get smaller and smaller until it disappeared over the rise, taking the last thread connecting her to her old life with it. The silence that followed was so complete it rang in her ears. Then the baby kicked again, and Clara remembered how to breathe. She turned slowly, found Rowan watching her with that same unreadable expression. I don't... Her voice came out hoarse. She cleared her throat, tried again. I don't understand. Why would you... You need help. Simple, factual. But you don't know me. Don't know what I... She gestured helplessly at her belly, at herself. People will talk. They'll say... They already talk. A ghost of something crossed his face. Not quite a smile, not quite bitterness, something in between. Let them. Clara didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know what to do with this strange, quiet man who'd just taken her in like it was the most natural thing in the world. Come on. Rowan turned toward the house. Sun's getting mean. You should be inside. She followed because she didn't know what else to do. Her legs felt shaky, and the ground seemed to tilt under her feet. When was the last time she'd eaten? Yesterday morning? The night before? Everything was starting to blur together. The house was cooler inside, though not by much. The main room was sparse, a table, a few chairs, a stone fireplace that looked like it hadn't been used in months. Everything was clean but bare, functional, like the man who lived here didn't see the point in decoration. Sit. Rowan pointed at one of the chairs. Clara sat. The chair creaked under her weight, and she felt her face flush hot. But Rowan didn't seem to notice. He was already moving around the small kitchen area, pulling things out of cabinets. Bread, cheese, some kind of dried meat, a jar of preserves. He set it all on the table in front of her, then went to fill a cup with water from the pump. Clara stared at the food. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but her throat felt too tight to swallow. Eat! Rowan set the water down beside her plate, then pulled out another chair and sat across from her. Not crowding, just there. I don't need... You're shaking. His eyes were steady on hers. And you look like you're about to pass out. Eat. She picked up the bread with trembling fingers. It was good bread, dense and slightly sweet. She took a small bite, and the second the flavor hit her tongue, Something broke open inside her. She was suddenly ravenous, tearing into the food like she might never see another meal. Rowan didn't say anything, just watched her eat, his expression unreadable. When she'd finished everything on the plate, everything, she finally looked up at him. "Thank you," he nodded. "You'll stay in the back room. I'll show you after you've rested." "I can work," she said quickly. "Whatever you need. I can clean or cook or—" "You can rest," he interrupted. "That's what you'll do. Everything else comes after." Clara opened her mouth to argue, but the exhaustion hit her all at once, a wave so strong it made her vision blur. She gripped the edge of the table. Rowan stood. "Come on." She followed him down a short hallway to a small room at the back of the house. It was simple. A bed, a chair, a small table with a basin and pitcher. The bed had clean sheets, a quilt folded at the foot. The window looked out over the empty land beyond the ranch. "This is mine?" Her voice came out small. "It's yours?" She turned to look at him, this stranger who'd taken her in without question, without judgment. "Why are you doing this?" Rowan was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough. "Because nobody else will." It wasn't a kind answer, but it was an honest one. He left, pulling the door most of the way closed behind him, and Clara was alone. She stood in the middle of the room, looking around at this space that was somehow hers now, and felt something crack open in her chest. Not gratitude exactly, not relief, something rawer than that, something that felt like the first breath after drowning. She lowered herself onto the bed, careful and slow. The mattress gave under her weight, and for the first time in months, maybe years, she let herself fully relax, let her spine uncurl, let her muscles unknot. And then, because there was no one to see her, no one to judge her for it, Clara curled on her side and cried. Not loud, desperate sobs, just quiet tears that soaked into the pillow as the baby moved inside her and the sun slanted through the window, painting everything gold. She woke to the smell of something cooking. For a disoriented moment, Clara didn't know where she was. The light had changed, gone from harsh afternoon to soft evening. The room was dim and her body ached from sleeping too hard, too deep. Then it came back. The wagon. Her father's face. Rowan. She sat up slowly, her hands automatically going to her belly. The baby was quiet now, settled. She ran her palm over the curve, feeling the solid reality of it. This thing that had ruined her life, this thing she was somehow supposed to love. She didn't know if she could. Clara stood, straightened her dress as best she could, the fabric strained tight across her middle, the seams threatening to split, and made her way out to the main room. Rowan was at the stove, his back to her, stirring something in a pot. The kitchen smelled like meat and onions, and something earthy she couldn't place. Her stomach growled loud enough to hear. "Sit," he said without turning around. She sat, watched him move around the kitchen with the same quiet efficiency he seemed to approach everything. He ladled stew into 2 bowls, cut more bread, brought it all to the table, and sat down across from her again. They ate in silence. The stew was good, simple, but flavorful. Clara ate slower this time, more conscious of him watching her. "How long?" Rowan asked finally. She looked up, confused. "How long what?" "How long until the baby?" Clara's hand went to her belly. "I don't know. A few weeks, maybe? Could be less. I'm not sure." He nodded, took another bite of stew. "Your father," Rowan said after a moment. "He coming back?" The question made her stomach clench. "I don't know. Maybe. Eventually." She pushed food around in her bowl. "He'll want to know if the baby's—" "Doesn't matter." Clara looked at him, startled. "What?" "Doesn't matter what he wants to know." Rowan's dark eyes were steady on hers. "You're here now. This is your home. He doesn't get to decide anything anymore." Something about the way he said it, so calm, so certain, made her throat tight. "You don't know him," she whispered. "He's not. People do what he says. He's important in town. He has friends, influence." "Out here?" Rowan gestured vaguely at the window, at the empty land beyond. "That doesn't mean much." Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to think she could just stay here, in this bare little house at the edge of nothing, and never have to face her father again.
But she knew better. Men like her father didn't let go, didn't forget. They came back eventually to collect what they thought they were owed. "Why did he bring me here?" she asked suddenly. "To you, I mean. How do you even know each other?" "No."
Rowan was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, "We don't, not really. He asked around town for someone who'd take you. Someone who lived far enough out that you wouldn't be seen. Someone who wouldn't ask questions." He met her eyes. "I fit the requirements." Clara's chest hurt. "So you're doing this for money?" "No." Simple, direct. "He offered. I refused. Told him I'd take you anyway."
"Why?" The word came out desperate. "Why would you do that? I'm nothing to you. I'm ruined. I'm a burden. Everyone says so." Rowan set down his spoon, looked at her with those dark, unreadable eyes. "Everyone's wrong." The certainty in his voice made something shift in her chest. "I know what people say about me," he continued, his voice low and rough. "That I'm dangerous, that I'm mean, that I break horses and men with equal pleasure. They tell stories, make me into something I'm not." He paused. "They do the same to you. Tell stories, make you into something you're not. Difference is, I stopped listening to them years ago." Claire didn't realize she was crying until a tear hit her hand. "You're not a burden," Rowan said quietly. "You're just a person who needs help, and I have help to give. That's all this is." But it wasn't all. Clara could feel it, even if she couldn't name it yet. This was something more, something that felt like the ground shifting under her feet, like the beginning of something she didn't have words for. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, embarrassed. "I'm sorry, I don't usually—" "You don't have to apologize." He stood, started clearing the dishes. "You're tired. Finish eating, then go back to bed. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. She finished her stew in silence while Rowan cleaned up, moving around the kitchen with that same quiet efficiency. When she was done, she stood carefully, steadying herself on the table. "Thank you," she said, "for the food, for all of it." Rowan glanced at her over his shoulder. "Get some sleep." She went back to her room, back to the bed with its clean sheets and the window that looked out over nothing. She lay down, one hand on her belly, and listened to the sounds of Rowan moving around the house. Heard the door close as he went outside. Heard his footsteps fade toward the barn. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara fell asleep without fear sitting on her chest like a stone. She woke before dawn, jerked out of sleep by a nightmare she couldn't remember. The room was dark, and for a panicked moment she didn't know where she was. Then the baby kicked, grounding her, and she remembered. Rowan's ranch. Her father was gone. She was safe. The word felt foreign, dangerous, like something she shouldn't trust. Clara lay there for a while, listening to the house settle, waiting for her heartbeat to slow. When it became clear she wasn't falling back asleep, she got up and made her way out to the main room. Rowan was already awake, standing at the window with a cup of coffee, looking out at the pre-dawn landscape. He didn't turn when she entered, but his shoulders shifted slightly, acknowledging her presence. "You're up early," she said. "Always am." He took a sip of coffee. "You want some?" "I shouldn't. The baby—" "Tea, then." He was already moving toward the stove, putting water on to boil. Clara watched him, this strange man who'd taken her in, and felt that same confusion from last night. Why? Why her? Why this? "Can I ask you something?" she said. Rowan glanced at her. "You can ask. Has anyone ever stayed here before? Besides you, I mean?" "No." "So I'm the first. You're the first." He poured hot water over tea leaves, brought the cup to her. "Sit down. You shouldn't be on your feet too long." Clara took the cup, grateful for the warmth. She sat at the table, cradling the tea in both hands. "Doesn't it bother you, having someone here, sharing your space?" Rowan was quiet for a moment, considering. "Not the way you'd think." "What does that mean?" He leaned against the counter, arms crossed over his chest. "Means I'm used to being alone. Chose it mostly. People in town, they don't understand quiet. They fill every space with noise, with judgment, with expectations." He looked at her. "You don't do that." "I barely talk," Clara said, a bitter edge to her voice. "What's there to understand?" "Exactly." There was something almost like approval in his tone.
You know when to be still. That's rare. Clara didn't know what to say to that. She sipped her tea, felt the heat spread through her chest. I'll need to check the fences today, Rowan said after a moment. North pasture. Takes most of the morning. You'll be here alone. Something cold touched her spine. That's fine. If anyone comes, no one will come. If anyone comes, he repeated, his voice firm, you don't answer the door, you don't go outside, you stay in your room until I get back. Clara's hands tightened on the cup. You think my father? I think there's a lot of men in this territory who see a woman alone as an invitation. His eyes were hard. You stay inside, understand? She nodded, throat tight. Rowan studied her for another moment, then nodded once and pushed off the counter. I'll be back by noon. There's food in the pantry if you're hungry. Don't push yourself. He left through the front door and Clara heard his footsteps fade toward the barn. A few minutes later, she heard hoofbeats, steady and rhythmic, heading north. Then she was alone. The house felt bigger without him in it, emptier. Clara finished her tea and stood, moving around the main room with careful steps. Everything was neat, organized, but there was almost nothing personal. No photographs, no letters. No sign that anyone actually lived here beyond the functional necessities of survival. She found herself drawn to the window, looking out at the land. The sun was coming up now, painting the eastern sky in shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, the kind of beauty that killed you if you weren't careful. The baby shifted, and Clara's hand went automatically to her belly. She could feel the shape of a foot, or maybe a hand, pressing out against her palm. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. I don't know how to be what you need. The baby pushed back, insistent. Clara closed her eyes. Tried to imagine a future where this worked, where she raised this child, in this house, with this silent man who'd taken them both in for reasons she still didn't understand. Tried to imagine being a mother, being worthy of that word. She couldn't. The morning passed slowly. Clara straightened up the kitchen even though it didn't need it, folded and refolded the blanket on her bed, stared out the window at the empty horizon. By the time she heard hoofbeats returning, she was wound so tight her shoulders ached. Rowan came through the door, dusty and sweat-streaked, and stopped when he saw her standing rigid in the middle of the room. What happened? Nothing. Clara forced her hands to unclench. Nothing happened. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Good. He moved past her to the sink, pumped water, splashed his face. Clara watched the water drip from his jaw, watched the muscles in his back shift under his shirt as he reached for a towel. I made lunch, she said suddenly. Well, I put things together. Bread and cheese and some of those preserves. It's not much, but that's good. He dried his face, turned to look at her. Thank you. They ate together at the table, the same quiet rhythm from breakfast. But this time, Clara found herself watching him more closely, trying to understand him. This man who moved through the world like he was carrying something heavy, something that made him careful with every step. Can I ask you something else? She said. Rowan glanced up. Go ahead. Why don't you have anyone? Family? Friends? Someone? His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Same reason you don't. Clara's throat closed. What's that? People are easier to leave than to keep. He said it simply, like it was just a fact of life. Learned that young. But you could, if you wanted. I don't want. He met her eyes, and there was something final in his gaze. I'm fine with how things are. Were, Clara corrected softly. How things were, before I showed up. Something flickered in his expression. Yeah, were. They finished eating in silence. Rowan stood, started clearing the dishes, but Clara stopped him with a hand on his arm. He froze, looking down at where her fingers touched his sleeve. Let me, she said. Please, I need to be useful for something. He studied her face for a moment, then nodded and stepped back. Clara gathered the dishes, moved to the sink. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she focused on the work, focused on doing something, anything, that felt like contributing. Behind her, she heard Rowan's chair scrape back, heard him leave through the front door again. She finished washing up, dried everything, put it all away in its proper place. When she turned around, the house was empty again. Clara stood in the middle of the kitchen, hands dripping, and felt the weight of it all settle on her shoulders. This life. This strange, fragile thing she'd stumbled into. This man who'd taken her in without asking for anything in return. She didn't trust it. Couldn't trust it. But maybe, just maybe, she could try to survive it. One day at a time. That's all she had to do. Just survive. The days started to blur together in a way that felt both comforting and unsettling. Clara would wake before dawn, find Rowan already up, moving through the house like a shadow. They'd share coffee, or tea in her case, in companionable silence. Then he'd disappear into the day's work and she'd be left alone with her thoughts and the growing weight of the life inside her. She tried to make herself useful. Started cooking meals even though Rowan never asked her to. Started mending his clothes when she found a tear in his work shirt, even though he looked startled when he noticed. Started sweeping the floors, organizing the pantry, doing all the small things that made a house feel less like a shelter and more like a home. But the isolation was getting to her, not the solitude. Clara had grown to appreciate the quiet, the way the silence here felt different from the suffocating silence of her father's house. This silence had room in it, space to breathe, but the isolation, the sheer distance from everything and everyone was starting to press on her like a physical weight. She'd been at the ranch for almost 2 weeks when she finally worked up the courage to ask, "Do you ever go into town?" Rowan looked up from the piece of tack he was repairing at the kitchen table. "Sometimes. Why?" "I just wondered." Clara busied herself with the vegetables she was chopping for dinner. "How far is it?" 3 hours by horse, 4 by wagon." "That's far." "That's the point." He went back to his work, fingers moving with practiced efficiency. "You need something?" "No, I just—" She paused, knife hovering over a carrot. "I wondered if people know that I'm here." Rowan was quiet for a moment. "They know." Something cold slid down Clara's spine. "How?" "Because your father made sure they'd know. Told everyone who'd listened that he'd dealt with his problem, that you were someone else's concern now." His voice was flat, but there was an edge to it. "Word travels." Clara's hand stilled. "So they're talking about me." "They're always talking about something." Rowan set down the leather strap he'd been working on. "Doesn't mean you have to listen." "Easy for you to say." The words came out sharper than she intended. "You chose this. Chose to live out here, away from everyone. I didn't choose any of this." "No," Rowan agreed, "you didn't." The acknowledgement, the simple, unvarnished truth of it, made Clara's anger deflate. She went back to chopping vegetables, but her hands were shaking now. "I'm sorry," she said after a moment. "That was unfair." It was honest. Rowan picked up the tack again. "I'd rather have honest than fair." They finished their tasks in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now, heavier. Clara could feel questions piling up in her throat, things she wanted to ask but didn't know how. About him, about his life before this, about why a man who seemed content with solitude would open his door to someone like her. That night, after dinner, she tried again. "Can I ask you something?" Rowan glanced up from the book he'd been reading, something about horse breeding, from what Clara could see. "You keep asking permission, you can just ask." "Fine." Clara set down the shirt she'd been mending. "Why do people call you dangerous?" His expression didn't change. "Because I am." The answer was so matter-of-fact it startled her. "What does that mean?" "Means I don't let people push me around. Means I've hurt men who tried." He turned a page, eyes scanning the text. "Means I know how to use violence when it's necessary, and I'm not sorry about it." Clara's pulse quickened. "Have you killed anyone?" "No." He looked at her then, dark eyes steady. "But I've come close." She should have been frightened, should have seen this as the confirmation of everything the town said about him. But all she felt was a strange sense of relief. Because at least he was honest. At least he didn't pretend to be something he wasn't. "Does that scare you?" Rowan asked. "I don't know." Clara picked at a loose thread on the shirt. "Should it?" "Probably." He closed the book, set it aside. "But you're not scared, I can tell." "How?" "Because you don't move different around me. Don't tense up when I come too close. Don't watch the door like you're planning an escape." His voice softened slightly. "You would if you were scared."
Clara realized he was right. She didn't feel threatened by him, despite his size, despite his reputation. If anything, his presence made her feel safer, like having a mountain between her and the rest of the world. "I've known scary men," she said quietly. "You're not one of them."
Rowan's jaw tightened. Your father. It wasn't a question. Clara nodded anyway. He ever hit you? No, he didn't have to. She forced herself to keep her voice steady. He knew other ways to hurt. Rowan didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, he comes back here, I'll kill him. The words were said so calmly, so simply, that it took Clara a second to process them. When she did, her breath caught. You can't. I can. And I will. Rowan's eyes were hard. That's not a threat, it's a promise. Nobody hurts you here, not him, not anyone. Clara felt something crack open in her chest. You barely know me. Don't have to know you don't deserve what he did. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she did deserve it, that she'd brought shame on her family, and this was the price. But the words wouldn't come. Because sitting here in this bare little house with this strange, quiet man, Clara was starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, everything she'd been told about herself was a lie. The baby kicked hard, as if in agreement, and Clara winced. Rowan noticed immediately. You all right? Fine, just the baby moves a lot now. She rubbed the spot where the little foot kept pushing. It's uncomfortable. Let me see. Clara froze. What? Your feet. They're swollen. I can tell by how you're sitting. He stood, moved toward her. Let me see. You don't have to. Clara. He crouched down in front of her chair, and the use of her name, the first time she'd heard him say it, made her go still. Let me help. Slowly she lifted her feet. They were swollen, the skin tight and shiny. Rowan's hands, those huge scarred hands, were surprisingly gentle as he examined them. You need to keep them elevated and soak them in cool water. He looked up at her. Why didn't you say something? I didn't want to be a burden. You're not a burden. He said it firmly, like he was correcting a mistake. You're a person who needs help. There's a difference. He disappeared outside, came back a few minutes later with a bucket of water from the well, set it in front of her, helped her ease her feet into it. The cool water was immediate relief, and Clara couldn't help the small sound that escaped her. Better? Rowan asked. Much. She looked at him. This man crouched at her feet like it was the most natural thing in the world. Thank you. He just nodded and stood, went back to his chair and his book like nothing had happened. But something had shifted between them. Clara could feel it, a subtle change in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks. She soaked her feet until the water went lukewarm, then dried them off and excused herself to bed. But sleep was a long time coming. She lay there in the dark, one hand on her belly, and tried to make sense of what was happening. Tried to understand why this stranger's kindness felt more dangerous than anything else she'd ever encountered. Because kindness, Clara was learning, was the most disarming thing in the world. It stripped away all your defenses, left you vulnerable in ways cruelty never could, and she was terrified of what that meant. The next morning, Clara woke to voices, male voices. She sat up fast, heart hammering, and strained to listen. Rowan's voice, low and measured, and another voice, younger, sharper, with an edge of mockery to it. Heard old man Whitlock finally got rid of his problem. That true? Clara's blood ran cold. You need to leave. Rowan's voice was flat. Come on, Vance. Just want to see what all the fuss was about. Girl must be something special for you to take her in. I said leave. Or what? The other voice turned mean. You gonna make me? We both know how that'll end. Town doesn't take kindly to you putting hands on folks. Clara climbed out of bed, moving as quietly as she could, and crept to the door. She could see them through the gap. Rowan standing on the porch, blocking the door, and a young man on horseback. She recognized him, Tommy Brennan. He'd been 2 years ahead of her in school, back before she'd stopped going. He'd always been cruel, the type who found joy in other people's pain. I'm not asking again, Rowan said. Tommy laughed. That's the thing about you, Vance. You think you're so tough, living out here all alone, playing at being dangerous, but everyone knows you're just... He didn't get to finish. Rowan moved so fast, Clara almost missed it. One second he was standing still, the next he had Tommy by the shirt, yanking him half off his horse. You want to test me? Rowan's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried. Go ahead, see what happens. Tommy's face had gone white. Let go of me. You ride back to town, and you tell everyone who'll listen. She's under my protection. Anyone who comes out here looking for trouble will find it. Understand? You can't. Rowan's grip tightened. Understand? Yeah. I understand. Rowan released him. Tommy scrambled back into his saddle, his horse dancing sideways. For a second, Clara thought he might try something stupid, but then he just spat in the dirt and wheeled his horse around, kicking it into a gallop. Rowan stood on the porch, watching until horse and rider disappeared over the rise. Then his shoulders sagged, just slightly, and he turned toward the door. Clara stepped back, but not fast enough. Their eyes met through the gap. You heard, he said. It wasn't a question. Clara nodded. Rowan came inside, closed the door behind him. That's going to happen more, now that they know for sure you're here. I'm sorry. The words tumbled out. I didn't mean to. This is exactly what my father was trying to avoid. People talking, people coming around. If I wasn't here, you wouldn't have to. Stop. Rowan's voice cut through her spiral. This isn't your fault. Tommy Brennan's an asshole who's been looking for an excuse to test me for years. You just gave him one. Would have been something else if it wasn't you. But no buts. He moved to the kitchen, started making coffee with sharp, efficient movements. They can talk all they want. Doesn't change anything. Clara watched him, this man who'd just defended her without hesitation, and felt something shift in her chest. Something that felt like gratitude but ran deeper, scarier. Why do you keep doing this? She asked quietly. Why do you keep defending me when you don't have to? Rowan paused, coffee pot in hand. When he spoke, his voice was rough. My mother, she was like you. Clara went still. Big woman. Took up space. People treated her like she was less than human because of it. His jaw tightened. My father was the worst of them. Used to say things, cruel things, right to her face, and she'd just take it, smile and apologize for existing, like she believed every word. What happened to her? She died when I was 12. Heart gave out. He poured coffee, the liquid dark and steaming. Doctor said it was just one of those things, but I knew better. She'd spent so long trying to make herself smaller, trying to disappear, that eventually she just did. Claire's throat ached. I'm sorry. I promised myself then that I'd never let anyone make someone feel that way again. Not if I could stop it. He looked at her, and there was something raw in his eyes. So that's why. That's why I keep defending you, because you remind me of her, and because nobody was there to defend her. Clara didn't realize she was crying until a tear hit her hand. She wiped at her face, embarrassed, but Rowan just handed her a handkerchief without comment. Thank you, she whispered, for telling me. He nodded once, then took his coffee and went outside. Clara watched him go, watched him disappear toward the barn, and felt the weight of his story settle on her shoulders. She wasn't the first person he'd tried to save, and something about that made her want to be worth saving even more. The incident with Tommy changed things. Clara noticed it in the way Rowan moved around the ranch now, more watchful, more tense. He kept a rifle by the door that hadn't been there before. Started checking the perimeter more often. Taught Clara where he kept his spare pistol, just in case. I don't know how to shoot, she protested when he showed her. Then you'll learn. He placed the gun in her hands, adjusted her grip. You don't have to like it, but you need to know how to protect yourself. I can't even see my feet anymore. How am I supposed to? You'll manage. His hands were still on hers, steadying them. Fear makes you capable of a lot of things you didn't think you could do. Clara looked down at the pistol, feeling the weight of it. I don't want to shoot anyone. Then don't. But if it comes down to you or them, his eyes met hers. You choose you every time. Promise me. I promise. He took her out behind the barn, set up some targets made from old cans, showed her how to load, how to aim, how to breathe through the recoil. Clara's first shot went wide. The second hit dirt, but the third pinged off a can with a satisfying ring. Good, Rowan said. Again. They practiced until her arms ached and her ears rang. When they finally went back inside, Clara's hands were shaking from more than just exertion. You did well, Rowan said, cleaning the pistol with practiced efficiency. I hated every second of it. I know.
He looked at her. But you did it anyway. That's what matters. That night, Clara dreamed of gunshots in her father's face, woke up gasping, her nightgown soaked with sweat. The baby was moving frantically inside her, responding to her panic, and she pressed both hands to her belly, trying to calm down. "It's okay," she whispered. "It's okay. We're safe. We're safe." But she didn't believe it. Not really. Because safety was starting to feel like a lie people told themselves. A fantasy that only lasted until reality came knocking. And Clara had learned the hard way that reality always came eventually. The weeks crawled by. Clara's belly grew impossibly larger, until she couldn't imagine how there could possibly be room for more. Every movement was a struggle. Getting out of bed, getting dressed, walking from one room to another. Her back ached constantly, and her feet were swollen so badly that the only shoes that fit were an old pair of Rowan's boots, which she shuffled around in like a child playing dress-up. Rowan, to his credit, never made her feel ashamed of it. Just adjusted around her limitations the way he adjusted around everything else, quietly, efficiently, without fanfare. He started helping her with tasks that required bending. Started cooking more of the meals when standing at the stove became too much. Started offering his arm when she needed to walk any distance. "I feel useless," Clara said one afternoon, frustrated by her own body's betrayal. "You're growing a whole person inside you. That's not useless. It doesn't feel like enough. That's because you've spent your whole life being told your worth comes from what you can do for other people." Rowan was fixing a broken chair leg, his hands steady. "But worth doesn't work like that. You exist. That's enough." Clara wanted to believe him. Wanted to internalize that truth the way she'd internalized all the lies. But it was hard. Harder than she'd expected. One evening, about 3 weeks after Tommy's visit, more riders came. Clara heard them before she saw them, the thunder of hoofbeats, multiple horses, moving fast. She was in the kitchen, and Rowan was outside near the barn. She went to the window, her heart climbing into her throat. 6 men. Maybe 7. It was hard to tell in the failing light. Tommy Brennan was at the front. But the others, Clara recognized some of them. Young men from town, the type who had nothing better to do than cause trouble and blame everyone else for their problems. She watched Rowan step out of the barn, saw him take in the situation with one long look. He didn't reach for the rifle she knew he kept just inside the door. Didn't move toward the house, just stood there, waiting. "Well, well," Tommy called out, reining in his horse about 20 feet away. The others fanned out around him, forming a loose semicircle. "Look who it is, the hermit who thinks he's a hero." Rowan didn't respond. "We came to see the girl," Tommy continued. "Word is she's something to look at. Big as a barn from what I hear. Probably can't even walk straight anymore." The other men laughed. Clara's face burned with humiliation, but she forced herself to stay at the window, forced herself to watch. "She's not available for viewing," Rowan said calmly. "That's not very neighborly." Tommy leaned forward in his saddle. "See? We heard her daddy's looking for her, wants to bring her home before she embarrasses him anymore. We figured we'd help out." "She's not going anywhere." "That's not your decision to make. It's hers, and she's made it." Clara's hands clenched on the windowsill. She should go out there, should face them herself. But her legs wouldn't move. Fear had rooted her to the spot, same as it always did. "Here's the thing, Vance." Tommy's voice turned hard. "You can't fight all of us. And we're not asking permission. We're taking her back. Whether you like it or not." Clara saw Rowan's shoulders shift slightly, saw his hands flex at his sides, and she knew with sudden, crystalline certainty that he was about to do something that couldn't be undone. She moved without thinking, pushed away from the window, crossed the room, threw open the door, stepped out onto the porch, despite every instinct screaming at her to hide. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. Her voice shook, but it carried. 7 pairs of eyes swung toward her. Clara saw their expressions, the shock, the disgust, the cruel amusement, saw the way their gazes raked over her body, taking in every detail of her size, her pregnancy, her existence. "Well, shit," one of them said. "She really is huge." More laughter. Clara's face burned hotter, but she forced herself to stand straight, to meet their eyes. "My father doesn't get to decide where I live," she continued, "and neither do you." Tommy's face twisted into something ugly. "You think you get a choice? You're a disgrace, an embarrassment. Your father wants you gone, and we're here to make sure that happens. Then you're going to have to go through me, Rowan said quietly. The laughter died. Tommy's hand moved toward his hip, where Clara could see a pistol holstered. That's a threat? Tommy asked. That's a fact. Rowan still hadn't moved, still stood there, calm and still and completely unafraid. You want her, you'll have to kill me first. And even if you do, even if all 7 of you manage it, I'll take at least 3 of you with me. Maybe 4. The silence that followed was so complete, Clara could hear her own heartbeat. So go ahead, Rowan continued. Draw. Let's see who falls first. Clara watched Tommy's face, saw the calculation happening behind his eyes, saw him weighing his pride against the very real possibility of dying for it. This isn't over, Tommy finally said. Yes, it is. Rowan's voice carried absolute certainty. Next time you come out here, someone dies. Could be me. But it'll definitely be you. That's the deal. You want to take it? Tommy stared at him for a long, tense moment. Then he spat in the dirt, jerked his horse around, and rode off. The others followed, some more reluctantly than others. Clara watched them disappear into the gathering dusk, her entire body shaking. When they were finally gone, her knees gave out. She would have fallen if Rowan hadn't been there, catching her, easing her down to sit on the porch steps. It's okay, he said quietly. They're gone. They'll come back. Clara's voice was barely above a whisper. You know they will. Maybe. Rowan sat beside her, his solid presence grounding. But not tonight. Clara pressed her hands to her face, trying to breathe through the panic. I'm going to get you killed. This is going to escalate and escalate until… Clara, look at me. She dropped her hands, met his eyes. I've been alone a long time, Rowan said. Chose it, preferred it. Figured that was just how my life would go. And then you showed up. He paused. And for the first time in years, I remembered what it felt like to have something worth protecting, something worth fighting for. But you're not getting me killed. You're giving me a reason to stay alive. His voice roughened. There's a difference. Clara didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to hold the weight of what he was offering her, this protection, this purpose, this quiet declaration that she mattered. So she just sat there beside him on the porch as the stars came out, one hand on her belly, the other gripping the wood beneath her like an anchor. And she tried to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could survive this after all. The morning after the riders came, Clara woke to find Rowan already gone. Not unusual, he was always up before dawn, but something about the quality of the silence felt different, heavier. She dressed slowly, her body protesting every movement, and made her way to the kitchen. A note sat on the table, written in Rowan's blocky handwriting. Gone to town, back by dark, stay inside, pistol loaded. Clara's stomach dropped. Town. He'd gone to town. To do what? Confront her father? Warn off Tommy and his friends? Get himself killed trying to defend her honor? She crumpled the note in her fist, anger and fear warring in her chest. He had no right. No right to risk himself like that, not for her. She wasn't worth it. Wasn't worth any of this. The baby kicked hard as if disagreeing, and Clara pressed her hand to the spot. You don't know anything yet, she whispered. You don't know how the world works. But even as she said it, she wondered if maybe the baby was smarter than she was. Maybe it understood something Clara was still too afraid to believe. The hours crawled by. Clara tried to keep busy, swept floors that didn't need sweeping, washed dishes that were already clean, stared out the window at the empty horizon until her eyes burned. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow made her heart race. By the time the sun started its descent toward the western hills, Clara was wound so tight she thought she might shatter. She paced the main room as much as her swollen body would allow, wearing a path in the floorboards. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats. Single horse, moving at a steady walk. Clara's hand went to the pistol on the table, but she didn't pick it up. Not yet. She moved to the window, peered out through the gap in the curtains. Rowan. It was Rowan, alive, whole, riding toward the house like nothing had happened. The relief that flooded through her was so intense it made her dizzy. She gripped the windowsill, forcing herself to breathe, and by the time Rowan came through the door, she'd managed to school her expression into something resembling calm. You went to town, she said. I did. He set his hat on the table, moved to the sink to wash his hands. His knuckles were scraped raw. Clara's eyes fixed on those scraped knuckles. What did you do? Had a conversation. With who? Tommy Brennan. Your father. Few others. He dried his hands, winced slightly when the towel caught on broken skin. Made some things clear. What things? Rowan turned to look at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. That you're not going anywhere. That anyone who comes out here looking for trouble will get more than they bargained for. That your father can disown you all he wants, but he doesn't get to decide what happens to you anymore. Clara's legs felt weak. She lowered herself into a chair. You could have been killed. Could have been. He shrugged. Wasn't. That's not funny. Wasn't meant to be. He pulled out the chair across from her, sat down with a heavy sigh. Your father tried to have me arrested. Said I was holding you against your will. Sheriff laughed in his face. He did? Turns out the sheriff doesn't much like your father. Something about unpaid debts and shady land deals. Rowan's mouth quirked slightly. Politics. Never understood them, but sometimes they work in your favor. Clara didn't know what to say. Didn't know how to process the fact that this man had walked into the lion's den for her. That he'd faced down her father, Tommy, the whole damn town, and walked back out alive. You're angry, Rowan observed. Clara stopped, tried to organize her thoughts. I'm terrified. You can't keep doing this. Can't keep putting yourself in danger for me. What if next time they don't just let you walk away? What if then they don't? His voice was calm, final. But that doesn't change anything. You're under my protection. That means something, at least to me. It shouldn't have to mean risking your life. Why not? He leaned forward, elbows on the table. What else am I supposed to do with it? I've spent the last 10 years existing. Just existing. Going through the motions, surviving. He paused. You showed up, and suddenly I remembered what it felt like to actually live. To have a purpose beyond just making it to the next day. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. That's too much pressure. I can't be someone's purpose. I can barely keep myself together. You don't have to be anything but yourself. Rowan's voice softened. That's the whole point. You just have to be here, alive, safe. Everything else is extra. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was being foolish, reckless, that she wasn't worth this level of devotion. But the words wouldn't come. Because somewhere deep inside, in a place she'd thought had died years ago, Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to believe she deserved protection, deserved safety, deserved to exist without apology. I made dinner, she said finally, changing the subject because it was easier than sitting with all these enormous feelings. It's probably cold now. That's all right. Rowan stood, moved to the stove. Cold food's better than no food. They ate in comfortable silence, the tension from earlier dissipating like morning fog. Clara watched him across the table, this strange, violent, gentle man who'd become her entire world, and felt something shift in her chest, something that felt dangerously close to trust. After dinner, while Clara washed dishes, Rowan came up behind her and set something on the counter. A small wooden box, worn smooth with age. What's this? She asked. Open it. Clara dried her hands and lifted the lid. Inside was a silver necklace. Nothing fancy, just a simple chain with a small pendant shaped like a bird in flight. It was tarnished, clearly old, but beautiful in its simplicity. It was my mother's, Rowan said quietly. Only thing I kept when she died. Figured you should have it. Clara's throat closed. I can't take this. It's too... You can, and you will. He reached past her, lifted the necklace from the box. Turn around. She did, and felt his hands at the back of her neck as he fastened the clasp. His fingers were gentle, careful, and when he was done, he rested his hands on her shoulders for just a moment before stepping back. Clara turned to face him, one hand going to the pendant at her throat. Why? Because you need something that's yours, something no one can take away. His dark eyes held hers. And because she would have liked you, would have understood what you're going through. The tears came then, silent and hot, streaming down Clara's face. Rowan pulled her into his arms, carefully, mindful of her belly, and let her cry against his chest. He didn't say anything, didn't try to fix it or make it better, just held her while she fell apart, one hand stroking her hair with surprising gentleness. When the tears finally stopped, Clara pulled back embarrassed. I'm sorry. I got your shirt all wet. Don't care. He handed her a handkerchief.
Feel better?
A little. She wiped her face, then looked up at him. Thank you. For the necklace. For everything. You don't have to thank me. I know, but I want to. Something passed between them then, an understanding, a recognition of what was building here. Neither of them named it. Neither of them was ready for that. But it was there, undeniable, growing like roots beneath the surface. That night, Clara lay in bed with her hand on the pendant, feeling its weight against her skin. She thought about Rowan's mother, about all the women who'd been told they were too much, who'd spent their lives trying to shrink, trying to disappear, about the ones who'd succeeded. She wouldn't be one of them, couldn't be, because she had this baby coming, this life that would depend on her, and she needed to be strong enough to survive, strong enough to show her child that existing wasn't something to apologize for. The baby kicked, and Clara smiled in the darkness. We're going to be okay, she whispered. I don't know how yet, but we will. The next few days passed in uneasy peace. No more riders came, no more threats. Clara started to relax, just slightly, though she never let herself forget how quickly things could change. She also started talking more, about her life before, about her mother who died when Clara was 12, about the sisters she'd left behind. Rowan listened the way he did everything else, quietly, completely, without judgment. Do you miss them? He asked one evening. Your sisters? Clara thought about it. Yes and no. We were never close. My father made sure of that. He'd pit us against each other, reward the ones who stayed thin and pretty, punish the ones who didn't. She picked at a loose thread on her dress. I was always the one being punished. That's not punishment. That's cruelty. Feels the same when you're living through it. Clara shifted, trying to ease the ache in her lower back. My youngest sister, Martha, she was kind. She used to sneak me food when my father put me on one of his improvement diets. But she was scared of ending up like me. She's still there? In his house? I assume so, unless he married her off already. The bitterness in Clara's voice surprised even her. That's what he does. Uses his daughters like bargaining chips. Martha was always his favorite. Pretty, delicate, obedient, everything I wasn't. Rowan was quiet for a moment, then, You want me to check on her? Make sure she's all right? The offer made Clara's chest tight. You'd do that? If you wanted me to. Clara thought about it. Thought about Martha, who'd be 14 now, old enough to be married off if their father found a buyer willing to pay. Young enough to still be saved. No, she said finally. She made her choice. Chose to stay quiet, chose to be safe. I can't blame her for that. She looked at Rowan. But thank you for offering. He nodded, accepting her decision without argument. That was something Clara had come to appreciate about him. He never pushed, never tried to tell her what to feel or how to handle her own pain. He just offered support and let her decide what to do with it. Later that night, Clara woke to a strange sensation. Not pain exactly, more like pressure, like something was shifting inside her, preparing. She lay there in the dark, one hand on her belly, and tried not to panic. It was too soon. At least she thought it was too soon. She'd lost track of time out here, lost track of weeks and months in the blur of survival. The pressure came again, stronger this time, and Clara bit her lip to keep from making a sound. This was normal, she told herself. Women's bodies did strange things at the end of pregnancy. It didn't mean anything was wrong. But by morning, the pressure had turned into cramps. Low, deep cramps that came and went in irregular waves. Clara tried to hide it, tried to go about her morning routine like nothing was happening, but Rowan noticed immediately. You're in pain, he said. I'm fine. Clara. He said her name like a reprimand. Don't lie to me. She sagged against the counter, one hand pressed to her lower back. I think it might be starting, the baby, but I'm not sure. The cramps are irregular and… How long? Since last night. But they're not that bad. Not yet. Rowan's jaw tightened. I'm sending for the midwife. We don't have a midwife out here. There's one in town, Mrs. Fletcher. She's helped deliver half the babies in the county. Clara's stomach clenched with something that wasn't a cramp. She won't come. Not for me. Not after everything. She'll come. Rowan was already moving toward the door. I'll make sure of it. Rowan, wait. But he was already gone, his horse thundering away toward town before Clara could finish her sentence.
She stood there in the empty kitchen, one hand on her belly, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. The cramps continued through the morning, growing gradually stronger but still irregular. Clara tried to rest, tried to conserve her energy, but fear kept her pacing. What if the midwife refused to come? What if something went wrong? What if the baby came too fast and she was alone? By early afternoon, she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses. Clara's heart jumped into her throat, and she moved to the window with her hand on the pistol Rowan had left within reach. But it was Rowan riding in, and behind him, a woman on a smaller horse. Mrs. Fletcher, presumably. She was older, maybe 50, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun and a face that gave away nothing. Clara met them at the door. Mrs. Fletcher dismounted with practiced ease and grabbed a bag from her saddle. "Where can I wash my hands?" she asked, all business. "Kitchen. There's a pump. I see it." The midwife brushed past her, already rolling up her sleeves. "How far apart are the pains?" "I don't know. 20 minutes? 30? That's early labor. Could be hours yet. Could be days." Mrs. Fletcher washed her hands thoroughly, then turned to examine Clara with a critical eye. "You're big. Baby's probably big too. That'll make things harder." Clara's face burned. "I know. Wasn't a criticism, just a fact." The midwife gestured toward Clara's room. "Let's have a look at you." The examination was uncomfortable and humiliating, but Mrs. Fletcher was efficient. When it was over, she pulled the blanket back over Clara's legs and stood. "You're not very far along yet. Probably looking at tonight or tomorrow morning at the earliest." She moved to the door, stopped and looked back. "I'm staying. Mr. Vance paid me well enough that I can spare a few days." "You don't have to—" "I said I'm staying." Mrs. Fletcher's voice was sharp. "First babies are unpredictable. I'm not leaving until it's done." She left the room, and Clara heard her giving instructions to Rowan in the kitchen, heard the low rumble of his response, heard the clatter of pots and the sound of water being heated. Clara lay there, one hand on her belly, and felt the baby move. Felt the cramps come and go, felt her body preparing for something she wasn't sure she was ready for. But ready or not, it was happening. The baby was coming, and Clara would have to be strong enough to survive it. The hours blurred together after that. The cramps, contractions, Mrs. Fletcher corrected her, gradually grew stronger and closer together. By evening, Clara couldn't hide her discomfort anymore. She paced the small room, paused when a contraction hit, breathed through it, then started pacing again. Mrs. Fletcher checked on her periodically, her touch clinical but not unkind. "You're doing fine," she said after one examination. "Everything's progressing normally." "How much longer?" "Can't say. Every woman's different, every birth is different." The midwife stood, wiped her hands. "Try to rest between contractions. You'll need your strength." But rest was impossible. Clara was too afraid, too aware of what was coming. She'd heard stories, women who died in childbirth, babies who came out wrong, births that went on for days until everyone involved was broken by them. Rowan appeared in the doorway, his face tight with concern. "Can I do anything?" "Stay close," Clara said. "Please. I need to know you're here." "I'm not going anywhere." He stepped into the room, pulled the chair closer to the bed. "I'll be right here, the whole time." Mrs. Fletcher glanced between them, something like understanding crossing her face. "Mr. Vance, I'll need your help when the time comes. This isn't going to be easy, and I can't do it alone." "Whatever you need." His voice was steady, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. The night wore on. The contractions grew stronger, closer, until they were coming every few minutes, and Clara couldn't think between them anymore, couldn't do anything but breathe and grip Rowan's hand and try not to scream. "You're doing good," he said quietly, his thumb rubbing circles on the back of her hand. "Just breathe. I've got you." "I can't." A contraction cut off her words, and Clara doubled over, gritting her teeth against the pain. "I can't do this. It's too much. I'm not strong enough." "Yes, you are." Rowan's voice was firm. "You're the strongest person I know. You've survived everything life threw at you. You'll survive this too." "You don't understand." "I know." His hand tightened on hers. "I know I don't understand, but I believe in you. That's got to count for something." It did. Somehow, impossibly, it did. Clara held on to that belief like a lifeline, let it pull her through the pain, through the fear, through the moments when she was certain she was going to die. Mrs. Fletcher checked her again, and this time her expression changed. "It's time. Baby's coming." She looked at Rowan. "I need you to support her. Help her sit up. She needs to push." Everything after that was a blur of pain and effort, and Mrs. Fletcher's voice guiding her through it. Push, breathe, push again. Clara's world narrowed to those commands, to Rowan's solid presence behind her, to the overwhelming need to get this baby out before it killed her. "I can see the head," Mrs. Fletcher said. "One more big push. Come on, Clara. You can do this." Clara bore down with everything she had, felt something tear, felt a burning pain so intense it whited out her vision. And then a cry, thin and reedy and the most beautiful sound Clara had ever heard. "It's a girl," Mrs. Fletcher announced, already working to clear the baby's airways. A big, healthy girl. Clara collapsed back against Rowan, shaking, crying, barely able to process what had just happened. Mrs. Fletcher worked efficiently, cutting the cord, cleaning the baby, wrapping her in a blanket. Then she placed the small bundle in Clara's arms. "Here's your daughter," she said softly. Clara looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and perfect, and felt her entire world shift. This was her baby, her daughter, the thing she'd carried for months, the weight that had defined her existence. The baby's eyes opened, just barely, and looked up at her. And Clara felt something crack open in her chest, something she'd thought was dead. Love. Pure, overwhelming, terrifying love. "Hello?" Clara whispered, touching the baby's tiny fist. "Hello, little one." The baby's fingers curled around hers and Clara started crying again. But these weren't tears of pain or fear. These were tears of something else, something that felt like hope. Behind her, Rowan shifted slightly. Clara looked up at him and saw something in his face she'd never seen before, wonder and pride, and something softer that he quickly hid. "She's beautiful," he said roughly, "like her mother." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she wasn't beautiful, had never been beautiful, but the words caught in her throat. Because looking down at this tiny person she'd created, seeing the absolute perfection of her, Clara wondered if maybe Rowan was right. Maybe beauty wasn't about being small or delicate or socially acceptable. Maybe it was about being alive, about surviving, about creating life even when the world told you that you shouldn't. "What will you name her?" Mrs. Fletcher asked, already cleaning up from the birth. Clara hadn't thought about it, hadn't let herself think that far ahead, too afraid to hope this would actually happen. But looking at her daughter now, one name came to mind. "Hope," she said quietly. "Her name is Hope." It felt right, felt true. This baby was hope. Hope for a different future. Hope for a different life. Hope that Clara could be something more than what she'd been told she was. Mrs. Fletcher nodded approvingly. "Good name." She finished her work and stood. "I'll stay tonight. Make sure you're both stable. But you did well, Clara. Very well. You should be proud." Proud. Clara turned the word over in her mind. She'd never been proud of herself before. Never had anything to be proud of. But holding this baby, her daughter, Clara thought maybe she could learn. Maybe she could look at what she'd survived and call it strength instead of weakness. The night passed slowly. Clara dozed fitfully, exhausted but unable to fully sleep, too aware of the tiny life in her arms. Hope nursed hungrily, instinct taking over, and Clara marveled at how natural it felt. How right. Rowan stayed nearby, dozing in the chair, one eye always slightly open, watching over them both. And Clara, despite everything, despite the pain, despite the uncertainty, despite not knowing what tomorrow would bring, felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. Mrs. Fletcher left 2 days after the birth, satisfied that both Clara and Hope were healthy enough to manage without her. She accepted payment from Rowan with a curt nod, then paused at the door. "You did good," she said to Clara. "Better than most first-time mothers. Keep the baby clean, keep yourself fed, and you'll both be fine." She glanced at Rowan. "And you? Make sure she rests. New mothers always think they need to do everything at once. They're wrong." "I'll make sure," Rowan said. Mrs. Fletcher studied them both for a moment longer, something unreadable in her expression. Then she climbed onto her horse and rode away, leaving Clara and Rowan alone with Hope.
The silence that followed felt different, heavier. Clara stood in the doorway, holding her daughter, watching the midwife disappear over the ridge, and felt the weight of responsibility settle onto her shoulders like a physical thing. "You should sit down," Rowan said behind her. "You're still healing." Clara wanted to argue, but her body betrayed her with a wave of exhaustion so intense she swayed. Rowan was there immediately, one hand on her elbow, guiding her back inside to the rocking chair he'd moved into the main room. She sat carefully, mindful of the soreness between her legs, and adjusted Hope in her arms. The baby was sleeping, her tiny face peaceful, completely unaware of how precarious her existence was. "I don't know what I'm doing," Clara said quietly. Rowan pulled up a chair across from her. "Nobody does. Not at first. You seem to know everything. I know horses, cows, how to fix a fence and shoot straight." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Babies? I'm as lost as you are." The admission made Clara feel slightly better. At least she wasn't alone in her incompetence. Hope stirred, making a small sound, and Clara instinctively adjusted her hold. The baby settled again, and Clara felt a fierce surge of protectiveness so strong it made her breathless. "I won't let anything happen to her," she whispered. "I don't care what it takes. I won't let this world break her the way it broke me." Rowan's eyes were dark and steady on hers. "Then it won't." Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to think that determination alone could protect Hope from cruelty, from judgment, from all the ways the world hurt people who didn't fit into neat little boxes. But she knew better, knew that wanting something and making it happen were two very different things. The first week passed in a blur of feedings and diaper changes and trying to sleep in 2-hour increments. Claire's body was still healing, still sore and swollen and wrong-feeling, but she pushed through it because Hope needed her. Because for the first time in her life, someone depended on her for their very survival. It was terrifying. Rowan helped more than she expected. Changed diapers without complaint, walked Hope around the house when she was fussy, stood guard while Clara bathed, because she was still too weak to trust herself alone, still afraid she might slip and drown with no one there to help. "You don't have to do all this," Clara said one evening, watching him rock Hope with surprising gentleness. "She's not your responsibility. Neither were you." He didn't look up from the baby. "Didn't stop me then. Won't stop me now." Clara's throat tightened. "Why? Why do you care so much?" Rowan was quiet for a long moment, his attention seemingly focused on Hope's sleeping face. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "Because I know what it's like to watch someone struggle alone, to see them drowning and not be able to help." He looked up at Clara. "I couldn't save my mother, but I can help you, so I will." The words settled between them like stones dropped in still water, creating ripples that spread outward, changing everything. Clara felt something shift in her chest, something that had been locked tight for so long she'd forgotten it existed. "I'm not your mother," she said softly. "I know." His eyes held hers. "But maybe that doesn't matter. Maybe helping someone, anyone, is enough." Clara wanted to say more, wanted to name this thing growing between them, but Hope chose that moment to wake with a cry, and the conversation was lost in the immediate demands of infant care. By the second week, Clara was starting to feel more like herself. Her body was healing, slowly but surely, and she was learning Hope's rhythms. When she was hungry, when she was tired, when she just needed to be held. It wasn't easy. Some nights Hope cried for hours, and nothing Clara did helped. Those nights were the worst, when Clara felt like a failure, when every insecurity she'd ever had came roaring back with a vengeance. But then Hope would finally settle, would look up at Clara with those dark, unfocused eyes, and everything else would fall away. Nothing mattered except this tiny person who trusted Clara completely, who had no idea that her mother was a mess of doubts and fears. One morning, 3 weeks after the birth, Clara woke to silence. Not the usual quiet of early morning, but absolute complete silence. No baby sounds, no breathing except her own. Panic seized her immediately. She lurched out of bed, ignoring the protest of her still healing body, and stumbled to the cradle Rowan had built and placed next to her bed. Hope was there, sleeping peacefully, chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Clara's legs gave out and she sank to the floor beside the cradle, one hand pressed to her racing heart. False alarm. Everything was fine, Hope was fine, but the panic lingered, crawling under Clara's skin like insects.
This was her life now. This constant state of fear, of checking and double-checking, of lying awake at night listening for sounds that might mean something was wrong. She was responsible for another human being, and the weight of that responsibility was crushing. "You all right?" Clara looked up to find Rowan in the doorway, his hair still messed from sleep, concern etched into his face. "I thought—" Her voice broke. "I woke up and it was so quiet and I thought something happened, but she's fine, she's just sleeping." Rowan crossed the room, crouched down beside her. "That's normal. The fear. It means you care." "I hate it." Clara wiped at her eyes, angry at her own weakness. "I hate feeling this way all the time. Like I'm one mistake away from losing everything. Welcome to being a parent." There was something almost like humor in his voice. "As far as I can tell, that feeling doesn't go away. You just learn to live with it." Clara laughed, though it came out more like a sob. "That's bleak. That's life." He stood, offered her his hand. "Come on, I'll make breakfast. You need to eat." She took his hand, let him pull her to her feet. His grip was warm and solid and steadying, and Clara found herself reluctant to let go. But she did, because holding on too long would mean something, and she wasn't ready to examine what that something might be. They ate together in the kitchen, Hope sleeping in her cradle nearby. The morning light slanted through the windows, painting everything gold, and for a moment Clara let herself imagine this was permanent, that this small, fragile piece could last forever. Then hoofbeats shattered the illusion. Rowan was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, moving to the window. Clara's heart hammered as she stood, scooping Hope from the cradle, holding her close. "Who is it?" she whispered. "Can't tell yet. Single rider." He watched for a moment longer, then his shoulders relaxed slightly. "It's the sheriff." Clara's breath caught. "The sheriff? Coming here?" That couldn't mean anything good. Rowan opened the door before the man could knock. Sheriff Hayes was older, maybe 60, with a weathered face and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He looked at Rowan, then past him to where Clara stood with Hope. "Miss Whitlock," he said with a nod. "Heard you had a baby." Clara's arms tightened around Hope. "Is that a crime now?" "No, ma'am. Just making sure you're both all right." His gaze shifted to Rowan. "Can I come in? Rather not have this conversation on your porch." Rowan stepped aside, though Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. The sheriff entered, removed his hat, and took the chair Rowan gestured to. "I'll get to it," Hayes said. "Your father's been causing trouble, saying you're being held here against your will, saying Mr. Vance here has no legal right to keep you." Clara's stomach dropped. "That's not true. I'm here because I want to be." "I figured as much. But I needed to hear it from you." The sheriff looked at her steadily. "You're of age. You can live where you want, with who you want, but your father's making noise about grandparents' rights. About the baby." Ice flooded Clara's veins. He has no rights to her. He threw me away. He doesn't get to—" "I know." Hayes held up a hand. "And legally, he doesn't have a leg to stand on. Long as you're a fit mother, long as that baby's being cared for, there's nothing he can do." He paused. "But fit mother. That's where things get tricky. You're unmarried, living with a man who's not your husband. Some people, some judges, might see that as unsuitable." Clara felt the floor drop out from under her. "You're saying he could take her?" "I'm saying it's a possibility. Small one, but it exists." The sheriff's voice softened. "I'm not here to threaten you, Miss Whitlock. I'm here to warn you. Your father's a vengeful man, and he's got friends. You need to be prepared." "Prepared how?" Rowan's voice was hard. "Married would help. Would give you both legal standing as Hope's parents. Would make it a hell of a lot harder for your father to claim unfitness." Hayes stood, replaced his hat. "That's all I came to say. Rest is up to you." He left, and the silence that followed was deafening. Clara stood frozen, Hope in her arms, her mind racing. Married. He'd suggested they get married, like it was simple, like it was the obvious solution. "He's right," Rowan said quietly. Clara looked at him. "What?" "He's right. Marriage would protect you both. Would give me legal standing to defend Hope if your father tries anything." He met her eyes. "We should do it." Clara's head spun. "You can't be serious. You can't just— We barely know each other. You don't—" "I know enough." His voice was steady, certain. "I know you're a good mother. I know you deserve protection. I know I want to help. Marriage is just paper. It doesn't have to mean more than that.
But it does, Clara's voice cracked. Marriage means... It means everything. It means promising to what? Stay together? Support each other? Rowan took a step closer. We're already doing that. This just makes it official, makes it legal, gives us both protection. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to list all the reasons this was a terrible idea. But looking down at Hope's sleeping face, thinking about her father's vindictive nature, thinking about judges who would see an unmarried woman as unfit by default, she couldn't. Just paper, she said softly. That's all it would be, if that's what you want. Something flickered in Rowan's eyes, gone too fast to identify. I'm not asking for anything you're not willing to give. I'm just offering protection, same as I've been doing. This just makes it legal. Clara closed her eyes, felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. This was insane. Reckless. Marrying a man she'd known for barely 2 months. A man who was still more stranger than friend. A man who'd protected her when no one else would. Who'd stood between her and every threat. Who'd held her while she cried and never asked for anything in return. All right, she whispered. All right, we'll do it. The wedding happened 3 days later. Sheriff Hayes agreed to officiate, and Mrs. Fletcher agreed to witness, and that was it. No ceremony, no celebration, just words spoken in Rowan's kitchen with Hope sleeping in a basket nearby. Clara wore her cleanest dress. Still stained and worn, but the best she had. Rowan wore his usual work clothes, though he'd shaved and combed his hair. They stood facing each other while Hayes read from a battered book, and Clara tried not to think about how wrong this all was. How she'd once imagined a real wedding, with a real groom who loved her, with family who celebrated instead of condemned. But when Rowan took her hand, his grip warm and steady, some of that bitterness faded. This wasn't the wedding she dreamed of, but it was the wedding she needed, and maybe that was enough. Do you, Rowan Vance, take Clara Whitlock to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. And do you, Clara Whitlock, take Rowan Vance to be your lawfully wedded husband? Clara looked up at Rowan, at this man who'd become her entire world, and felt something shift in her chest. I do. Then by the power vested in me by the territory, I pronounce you husband and wife. Hayes closed the book. You can kiss if you want, or not. Up to you. Rowan looked at Clara, a question in his eyes. She nodded, just slightly, and he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. It was brief, chaste, barely more than a brush of contact, but Clara felt it all the way to her toes. When he pulled back, something had changed. They were married now, legally bound. For better or worse, they were in this together. Mrs. Fletcher clapped once, breaking the moment. Congratulations. Now let's have some coffee and cake. I didn't bake it for nothing. The celebration, such as it was, lasted an hour. They ate cake and drank coffee and made awkward small talk, and then Hayes and Mrs. Fletcher left, taking the marriage certificate with them to file in town. And then Clara and Rowan were alone, married. The word felt foreign, dangerous, like something that might explode if handled wrong. Nothing has to change, Rowan said, reading her expression. You keep your room, I keep mine. This is just legal protection, that's all. Clara nodded, relief and disappointment warring in her chest. Right, just protection. But as the days passed, Clara found that things did change. Small things. The way Rowan touched her shoulder when he passed. The way he said "my wife" when talking to the few people who came around. The way he looked at Hope like she was partly his, like he had a right to that pride. And the way Clara caught herself watching him. Noticing things she hadn't before. The way his hands moved when he worked. The way his voice rumbled low in his chest when he talked to the horses. The way he was patient with Hope, even at 3 in the morning when she wouldn't stop crying. She was starting to feel things, dangerous things, things that went beyond gratitude and crept into territory she'd promised herself she wouldn't explore. One night, about a week after the wedding, Hope was particularly fussy. Clara walked her around the house, bouncing and shushing, but nothing worked. She was about to cry herself when Rowan appeared, took Hope from her arms, and started humming something low and rhythmic. Hope settled almost immediately, her cries fading to whimpers and then to nothing as she relaxed against Rowan's chest. How do you do that? Clara asked, exhausted and amazed in equal measure. Old song my mother used to sing. Horses like it too. He kept humming, swaying slightly. You should sleep.
I've got her. You need sleep too. I'm used to getting by on less. He looked at her and there was something soft in his eyes. Go, rest. That's an order. Clara was too tired to argue. She stumbled back to her room, collapsed onto the bed, and was asleep before her head fully hit the pillow. She woke hours later to sunlight streaming through the window and silence. Panic gripped her immediately. Where was Hope? But then she heard voices from the main room, Rowan's low rumble and Hope's little coos and gurgles. Clara got up, splashed water on her face, and made her way to the kitchen. Rowan was sitting at the table with Hope in his lap, letting her grab at his fingers while he talked to her in that quiet, steady voice. And that's why you don't trust a horse that pins its ears back. Means it's thinking about biting, or kicking, or both. Hope made a sound and Rowan nodded seriously. Exactly. You're a smart one. Going to be smarter than both of us combined, I reckon. Clara's chest ached watching them. This shouldn't be possible. Shouldn't be real. This man who owed them nothing, who'd married her out of duty and protection, acting like Hope was his own daughter. How long have you been up? She asked. Rowan glanced up. Couple hours. You needed the sleep. You needed it too. I'm fine. He stood, carefully transferred Hope to Clara's arms. There's coffee, and I made eggs. They're probably cold now, but they're perfect. Clara settled Hope against her shoulder. Thank you for watching her, for letting me sleep. That's what husbands do. He said it matter-of-factly, like it was the most natural thing in the world. The word husband still felt strange. But Clara was starting to realize that maybe strange didn't have to mean bad. Maybe strange could become familiar, given enough time. She ate the cold eggs and drank the coffee and watched Rowan move around the kitchen and let herself imagine, just for a moment, that this was real. That this marriage was more than just paper. That this family they'd cobbled together from nothing could actually last. The dream shattered a week later when riders came again. Clara heard them first, the thunder of multiple horses, moving fast. She was outside hanging laundry, Hope sleeping in a basket at her feet, and the sound made her blood run cold. She scooped up Hope and ran for the house, screaming for Rowan. He appeared from the barn, rifle already in hand, his face grim. Get inside, lock the door. Don't open it unless I tell you to. Rowan, now Clara. She ran. Got inside, locked the door, moved to the window where she could see without being seen. Hope started to fuss, sensing Clara's fear, but Clara held her close and whispered desperate reassurances she didn't believe. 8 riders this time. Maybe 9. Led by a man Clara recognized even from this distance. Her father. He rode right up to the house, reined in his horse, and looked around with an expression of cold contempt. Vance, he called out, I know you're here, and I know my daughter's here. We need to talk. Rowan stepped out from behind the barn, rifle lowered but ready. Nothing to talk about. Clara made her choice. She's staying. That's where you're wrong. Her father dismounted, and the men with him followed suit. See, I've been doing some research, talked to some lawyers. Turns out when a woman's been declared unfit, when she's living in sin with a man not her husband, when she's clearly incapable of caring for a child, well, the courts can intervene. Clara's hands tightened on Hope. No, he couldn't. They were married now, legally married. He couldn't. She's my wife, Rowan said, his voice carrying across the yard. We're legally married. Sheriff Hayes officiated. It's all on record. Her father's face twisted. Convenient. Mighty convenient. Almost like you knew I was coming. He took a step forward. But here's the thing. Marriage don't mean much when it's clearly a sham. When everyone knows you only did it to keep the baby. Doesn't matter why we did it. It's legal. Rowan's voice was hard. And you're trespassing. Get off my property. Not without my granddaughter. The words hung in the air like a threat. Clara's vision blurred with tears. He didn't care about Hope. Didn't care about being a grandfather. He just wanted to win. Wanted to prove he still had control. You're not taking her. Rowan's rifle came up, not quite pointing, but no longer lowered. I'll die before I let you. Her father smiled, cold and cruel. That can be arranged. The men behind him moved, hands going to their weapons. Clara's heart stopped. This was it. This was how it ended, with violence and blood and her daughter growing up without any of them. But then another sound. More hoofbeats, coming fast from the direction of town. Everyone froze. Sheriff Hayes rode into the yard, and he wasn't alone. Behind him were at least a dozen men, some Clara recognized as ranchers from the area, others she didn't know. They spread out, creating a wall between her father's men and the house. "That's enough, Whitlock," Hayes said, his voice carrying authority. "You're done here." Her father's face flushed dark. "This is none of your business, Hayes. It became my business when you started threatening citizens of my county." The sheriff gestured to the men with him. "These folks don't take kindly to bullies. Don't take kindly to men who abandon their daughters, then try to steal their babies. You want to take this further? We can. But I guarantee you won't like how it ends." Clara watched through the window, hardly daring to breathe. Her father looked at Hayes, at the men with him, at Rowan standing ready with his rifle. She saw the calculation in his eyes, saw him weighing his options. "This isn't over," he finally said. "Yeah, it is." Hayes's voice was flat. "You come back here again, I'll arrest you for trespassing. You threaten these folks again, I'll arrest you for assault. You try to take that baby, I'll shoot you myself. We clear?" Silence. Then her father jerked his head toward his men. "Let's go." They mounted up and rode out, and Clara didn't breathe easy until they were gone from sight. Even then, her hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold Hope. The door rattled. Rowan, trying to get in. Clara unlocked it with trembling fingers, and he was there, pulling her into his arms, careful of Hope between them. "You're safe," he murmured. "You're both safe. I've got you." Clara pressed her face against his chest and let herself fall apart, just for a moment. Let herself be held while the terror worked its way out of her system. Hope cried, overwhelmed by the emotion, and Clara and Rowan held her together, forming a shelter with their bodies. Outside, Sheriff Hayes was talking to the men who'd come with him. Clara could hear fragments. "Appreciate the support. Won't bother them again. Send word if there's trouble. Ate." When she finally pulled back from Rowan, she found his face set in grim lines. "He'll try again," she whispered. "Probably." Rowan's jaw tightened, but not today, and maybe not tomorrow. We buy time, we get stronger, we figure out how to make this permanent. How? I don't know yet. He looked down at her, at Hope, and something fierce blazed in his eyes. But we will, whatever it takes. The weeks after her father's confrontation were tense. Clara found herself jumping at every sound, checking the horizon constantly, waiting for him to come back with lawyers or more men or some new threat she hadn't anticipated. But days turned into weeks, and nothing happened. No riders, no threats, just silence. The silence was almost worse than the confrontation. At least with a visible enemy, you knew what you were fighting. This waiting, this not knowing, ate at Clara from the inside. Hope was growing fast. 2 months old now, her eyes starting to focus, her little hands reaching for things with more purpose. She smiled when Rowan talked to her, cooed when Clara sang. She was becoming a person, distinct and real, and the weight of keeping her safe pressed heavier on Clara's chest every day. One evening, after Hope had finally fallen asleep, Clara found Rowan on the porch. He was sitting on the steps, looking out at the darkening land, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands. "Can't sleep?" she asked. He glanced back at her. "Just thinking." Clara sat down beside him, careful to leave space between them. They were married, but they still moved around each other like strangers sometimes, like neither of them was quite sure where the boundaries were. "About my father?" "About everything." Rowan took a sip of coffee, grimaced at the temperature. "About what comes next, how we keep you both safe long term." Sheriff Hayes said, "Sheriff Hayes is one man, and he's getting old. What happens when he retires? When someone new takes over who maybe sees things different?" Rowan shook his head. "We can't rely on other people to protect us. We need to be strong enough to stand on our own." Clara pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The night air was cool, carrying the smell of sage and dust. "How do we do that?" "I've been thinking about that." Rowan set down his cup. "Your father has power because he has money, land, influence. We need the same. We don't have any of that. Not yet. But this ranch, it's mine free and clear. No debt, good water rights. We expand, build it up, make it profitable enough that people respect it, respect us." He looked at her. It won't happen overnight, but it's possible. Clara tried to imagine it. This bare, struggling ranch becoming something bigger, something that commanded respect. It felt like a fantasy. And in the meantime, she asked, what do we do while we're building all this? We survive, same as we've been doing. His voice softened. And we raise hope. Teach her to be strong. Teach her that she's worth something, no matter what anyone else says. The words hit Clara square in the chest. Because wasn't that what she'd needed her whole life? Someone to tell her she was worth something? Someone to believe it loud enough that she might start to believe it too? I don't know how to do that, she admitted. How to teach her something I'm still trying to learn myself. Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, maybe we learn together. You, me, and her. Maybe that's what family is. People figuring it out as they go, making mistakes, but staying together through it. Family. The words settled between them like a promise. Clara looked at Rowan, really looked at him, and saw not just the man who'd taken her in, but the man who'd stood beside her, who'd married her to keep her safe, who rocked hope at 3 a.m. and never complained, who was trying in his own rough way to build something worth having. You're a good man, she said quietly. Rowan's jaw tightened. I'm not. I've done things, hurt people. So have I. Maybe not with my fists, but with words, with judgment. I was cruel to people who looked different, who acted different, because I was so desperate to be accepted that I threw everyone else under just to climb a little higher. Clara's voice cracked. And it didn't work anyway. I still ended up here, still ended up cast out. Maybe that's the point, Rowan said. Maybe we all have to fall before we learn how to stand. They sat in silence for a while, shoulder to shoulder, watching the stars come out. And Clara felt something shift inside her, a letting go of who she'd been trying to be, and an acceptance of who she actually was. Flawed, scared, imperfect, but trying, always trying. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Not threats this time, but help. Mrs. Fletcher arrived with supplies, fabric for diapers, jars of preserved food, a hand-knit blanket for Hope. She accepted Clara's stammered thanks with a wave of her hand. Town's talking, she said bluntly, about what your father tried to do, about how the sheriff stood up for you. People are starting to see things different. Not everyone, she added quickly. But enough. Clara didn't know what to say to that. The idea that public opinion might be shifting, that she might be seen as something other than a disgrace, felt too fragile to touch. Over the following weeks, more people came. A rancher brought hay for Rowan's horses. The blacksmith's wife dropped off a box of outgrown baby clothes. Even Tommy Brennan's mother showed up, shamefaced, with a basket of eggs and an apology for her son's behavior. I raised him better than that, she said, not quite meeting Clara's eyes. He's got a mean streak like his father, but that's no excuse. Clara accepted the eggs and the apology, though she couldn't quite bring herself to forgive. Some wounds went too deep for a basket of eggs to heal. But something was changing. Clara could feel it in the way people looked at her when she did venture into town, still wary, still judgmental in some quarters, but curious too. Like they were reassessing. Like maybe the story they'd been told about Clara Whitlock wasn't the whole truth. Hope was 3 months old when Martha showed up. Clara was in the garden. Rowan had helped her start one, saying they needed to be more self-sufficient. When she heard a horse approach, she looked up, one hand shading her eyes against the sun, and saw a figure she recognized immediately. Her youngest sister. Thinner than Clara remembered, older looking, with shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there before. Clara stood slowly, dirt on her hands, her heart hammering. Martha? The girl, woman, really, she was 15 now, dismounted clumsily and just stood there, gripping her horse's reins like a lifeline. I'm sorry, Martha blurted out. I know I shouldn't have come. I know you probably hate me, but I had to. I needed to see. Her voice broke. Is it true? Do you really have a baby? Clara felt her throat close. Yes. Can I? Martha took a tentative step forward. Can I see her? Clara wanted to say no. Wanted to protect Hope from anyone connected to their father, but looking at Martha's face, so young, so desperate, she couldn't. She's inside, sleeping. Clara brushed dirt from her hands. Come on. They walked to the house in silence. Clara led Martha inside to the cradle where Hope lay sleeping peacefully. Martha stared down at the baby, and tears started streaming down her face. "She's beautiful," Martha whispered. "She looks like you. She looks like herself." Clara picked up Hope, who stirred but didn't wake. "Why are you here, Martha? If Father finds out you came—" "I don't care." Martha wiped at her face roughly. "I don't care what he does anymore. I'm so tired of being scared all the time. Of watching what I eat, what I say, how I move. Of trying to be perfect so he doesn't—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "I wanted to tell you I'm sorry. For not standing up for you, for letting him do what he did. You're my sister, and I failed you." Clara felt something crack open in her chest. "You were a child. You were a child. You couldn't have—" "I could have tried." Martha's voice was fierce. "I could have done something, anything, but I was too scared, and I hate myself for it." Clara shifted Hope to one arm and reached out with the other, pulling Martha into an awkward embrace. Her sister was so thin, all sharp angles, and barely contained tension. She clung to Clara like she was drowning. "It's not too late," Clara said softly. "You're here now. That's something." Martha pulled back, wiping her eyes again. "He's planning something, Father. I heard him talking to his lawyer about custody laws, about proving you unfit. He's not giving up." Cold fear slid down Clara's spine. "When?" "I don't know. Soon, I think. He's obsessed with it, with proving he was right about you, with showing everyone that you're exactly what he always said you were." Martha's hands clenched into fists. "He wants to take your baby and give her to someone else, someone suitable. It's sick." Clara's arms tightened around Hope. "He can't. I'm married now, legally married, and Sheriff Hayes won't be enough." Martha's eyes were dark with knowledge beyond her years. "Father has judges in his pocket, politicians, men who owe him favors. He'll use all of it if he has to." The words settled over Clara like a shroud. She'd known, on some level, that this wasn't over, but hearing it confirmed, hearing that her father was actively working to destroy her, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "Then we need to be ready." Rowan's voice came from the doorway. Clara hadn't heard him come in, but he was there, his presence solid and reassuring. "We need to make sure that when he comes, we're strong enough to stand against him." Martha turned to look at him, and Clara saw her sister take in Rowan's size, his scars, the quiet intensity of his presence. Saw her sister's expression shift from fear to something like hope. "You're him," Martha said. "The one who protected her. I'm her husband." Rowan's voice was firm. "And Hope's father. And nobody's taking either of them from me." The way he said it, with such absolute certainty, made Clara's chest ache. Because he meant it. This man who'd married her out of duty, who'd taken on her burden without being asked, who owed her nothing. He meant every word. Martha stayed for dinner. She was nervous around Rowan at first, but he was patient with her, answering her questions about ranch life, showing her the improvements he'd made. Clara watched them together and felt something ease inside her. Martha was seeing what Clara had seen, that strength didn't have to mean cruelty, that protection didn't require possession. When it was time for Martha to leave, she hugged Clara tight. "I'll keep my ears open," she whispered. "I'll warn you if I hear anything specific. And Clara—" She pulled back, looked her sister in the eyes. "You're not what he says you are. You never were. And I'm sorry it took me this long to see it." Clara watched her sister ride away, back toward a house that had never felt like home, and felt the weight of their shared past pressing on her shoulders. Martha was still trapped there, still living under their father's rule, and Clara didn't know how to help her without putting Hope at risk. "She can come here," Rowan said quietly, "if she needs to. There's room." Clara looked at him, this man who kept expanding his circle of protection without hesitation. "You'd do that? Why not? She's family, and she's not safe there." He met Clara's eyes. "Nobody who comes here asking for help gets turned away. That's the rule." The rule. Like he'd decided this long ago, had built his entire life around this principle of protecting the vulnerable. Clara wondered if he knew how rare that was, how most people spent their whole lives looking out only for themselves. 2 weeks after Martha's visit, the storm hit. Not a weather storm, though the sky was dark with gathering clouds, but something worse. A legal storm. A man arrived from town with papers, official-looking documents that he handed to Rowan with obvious reluctance. "I'm sorry," the man said. "I'm just the messenger. Court order. Says you have to appear before Judge Morrison next week. Something about custody." Clara's vision blurred. This was it. Her father's next move. He was taking her to court, going to make her stand in front of a judge and defend her right to keep her own child. Rowan read through the papers, his jaw getting tighter with each line. When he finished, he looked at Clara, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Fear. "We need a lawyer," he said. They found one eventually, a young man fresh from back east, looking to make a name for himself. His name was Daniel Brooks, and he listened to their story with increasing anger. "Your father doesn't have a case," he said finally. "You're married. The child is being cared for. You're of sound mind. There's no legal basis for removing the child from your custody." "Then why is there a hearing?" Clara asked. "Because your father has influence. Because Judge Morrison owes him favors. Because the system is rigged in favor of men with money and power." Brooks leaned forward. "But that doesn't mean we can't win. It just means we have to fight smart." The week before the hearing was hell. Clara barely slept, running through every possible scenario in her mind. What if the judge sided with her father? What if they took hope away? What if everything she'd built, this fragile, imperfect family, came crashing down? Rowan was a rock beside her, steady, certain. He took care of Hope when Clara was too anxious to focus, made sure she ate even when food tasted like ash, held her at night when the panic got too bad and she couldn't breathe. "We'll get through this," he said over and over. "Whatever happens, we'll get through it." But Clara wasn't sure she believed him. Because some things you didn't get through. Some things broke you so completely that there was no coming back. The day of the hearing arrived gray and cold. They rode into town together, Hope wrapped in blankets against the chill. The courthouse was packed. Apparently word had spread, and half the county wanted to watch the show. Clara's father was already there, sitting at the front with his lawyer, looking smug and satisfied. He didn't even glance at Clara when she walked in, like she wasn't worth acknowledging. Judge Morrison was an older man, stern-faced, with cold eyes that revealed nothing. He called the court to order, and Clara's father's lawyer stood up first. What followed was character assassination masquerading as legal argument. The lawyer painted Clara as unstable, immoral, unfit. Brought up every rumor, every piece of gossip, every cruel thing that had ever been said about her. Made her sound like a monster who'd somehow tricked a simple rancher into marriage just to keep her illegitimate child. Clara sat there listening, each word landing like a physical blow, and felt herself shrinking, felt all her old insecurities roaring back to life. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was unfit. Maybe Hope would be better off with someone else. Then Rowan's hand found hers under the table, and he squeezed hard. She looked at him, and he shook his head slightly. "Don't listen. Don't believe them." When it was their turn, Daniel Brooks stood up. He was younger than the opposing lawyer, less polished, but when he spoke, his voice rang with conviction. "Your Honor, this case isn't about Clara Vance's fitness as a mother. It's about a vindictive man trying to punish his daughter for having the audacity to survive when he tried to throw her away." Brooks gestured toward Clara's father. "Mr. Whitlock abandoned his daughter when she was 8 months pregnant, left her at a stranger's ranch with no resources, no support, hoping she'd fail, hoping she'd prove him right. But she didn't fail. She survived. She built a life. She married. She's raising a healthy, happy child. And now, because she succeeded where he wanted her to fail, he's trying to take that child away." The courtroom was silent. Brooks continued. "The law says a parent must be proven unfit before their rights can be terminated. So let's look at the evidence. Clara Vance is married to a respectable landowner. She has a home. She has support from the community." He gestured to the crowd. "Half the people in this room brought letters attesting to her character, to her capability as a mother, to the healthy condition of her child." It was true. Clara hadn't known, but apparently Mrs. Fletcher had organized a letter-writing campaign. Ranchers, shopkeepers, even Sheriff Hayes had written statements supporting Clara's fitness as a parent. Brooks laid them out on the judge's bench one by one. "This is what the community thinks, Your Honor, not what one bitter man with an axe to grind thinks. This is the truth." Clara's father's lawyer stood up, sputtering objections, but Brooks talked over him. "And let's be clear about what Mr. Whitlock's real complaint is. He's not worried about his granddaughter's welfare. He's worried about his reputation. He's worried that people will see how he treated his own daughter and judge him for it. He wants the baby removed not to save her, but to erase the evidence of his own cruelty. That's enough, Judge Morrison said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Brooks turned to face the judge fully. Because I think the people in this courtroom deserve to know what kind of man is trying to take custody of an infant. I think they deserve to know that Mr. Whitlock has a history of... I said enough. The judge's gavel came down hard. I'll review the evidence and make my decision. Court is adjourned. They filed out of the courthouse into the cold afternoon. Clara's legs were shaking so badly she could barely walk. Rowan kept his hand on her elbow, steadying her, while Daniel Brooks talked rapidly about precedent and legal strategies and odds. It could go either way, he admitted finally. Morrison's hard to read, but I think we made our case. I think he saw through your father's bullshit. Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to think that truth and justice actually mattered, but she'd seen too much of how the world really worked to have much faith left. They went back to the ranch and waited. 3 days. That's how long Judge Morrison took to make his decision. 3 days of Clara existing in a state of suspended terror, unable to eat, unable to sleep, barely able to function beyond caring for Hope. On the 3rd day, Daniel Brooks rode out to deliver the news in person. Clara saw him coming and felt her heart stop. This was it. The moment that would define the rest of her life. Brooks dismounted, and his face was carefully neutral. Clara couldn't read him, couldn't tell if the news was good or bad. Well? Rowan's voice was rough. Brooks smiled, actually smiled. You won. Judge Morrison ruled that there's no evidence of unfitness, that Clara is a capable mother with a stable home, that Mr. Whitlock's petition is denied. Clara's knees gave out. She would have fallen if Rowan hadn't caught her, pulling her against his chest while she sobbed with relief so intense it hurt. It's over, Brooks continued. Morrison also issued a restraining order. Your father can't come within 100 yards of you or Hope. Can't contact you, can't harass you. If he tries, he'll be arrested. He'll appeal, Clara said through her tears. He'll find another way. He already tried. Morrison denied the appeal, said the case was frivolous and any further legal action would be considered harassment. Brooks was grinning now. You're free, Clara. You and Hope. You're finally free. Free. The word felt impossible. Clara had been fighting for so long, fighting to survive, fighting to protect Hope, fighting to prove she deserved to exist, that she didn't know what to do with freedom. But as Rowan held her, as Hope made little cooing sounds from her cradle inside, as the reality of what they'd won started to sink in, Clara felt something shift. The fear that had lived in her chest for months, maybe years, started to loosen, started to ease. They celebrated that night. A quiet celebration, just the 3 of them and Daniel Brooks, who stayed for dinner. Clara cooked a real meal for the first time in days, and they ate together at the table while Hope slept peacefully in her basket. What will you do now? Brooks asked. Now that you don't have to worry about legal battles? Clara looked at Rowan, found him already looking at her. We'll live, she said simply. Build this ranch. Raise Hope. Just live. It sounded so simple. But Clara was learning that simple was enough. That living, really living, without fear, without shame, without constantly looking over your shoulder, was its own kind of victory. The seasons changed. Spring turned to summer, and the ranch came alive with new growth. Rowan expanded the herd, started breeding horses seriously, built new fences and corrals. Clara kept her garden going, started selling vegetables in town, began to build relationships with other women who'd once shunned her. Hope grew. Started crawling, then pulling herself up on furniture, then taking her first wobbling steps. She was fearless, that baby, always reaching for things just out of her grasp, always pushing boundaries. Clara saw herself in that fearlessness, or maybe the version of herself she could have been if the world hadn't spent so long teaching her to be afraid. One evening, nearly a year after the court hearing, Clara stood on the porch watching the sunset. Hope was inside with Rowan, the 2 of them playing some game that involved a lot of laughing and squealing. The sound made Clara smile. She heard the door open behind her, felt Rowan's presence before he spoke. She's asleep. Finally. He came to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Fought it hard tonight. She doesn't like to miss anything. Clara leaned into him slightly.
Gets that from you, I think, that stubborn streak. Pretty sure she got it from you. There was humor in his voice. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn from gold to purple to deep blue. Then Rowan said, "I've been thinking." About? About us. About this marriage. Clara's heart jumped. She'd been thinking about it too, about how they still kept to separate rooms, still moved around each other with careful politeness, about how the marriage that had started as protection had become something else, something neither of them had named yet. "What about it?" she asked carefully. "I married you to keep you safe, to give Hope a stable home. Those were the reasons." Rowan turned to look at her, but somewhere along the way those stopped being the only reasons. Clara's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I love you." The words came out rough, like they'd been dragged from somewhere deep. "I don't know when it happened, don't know how, but it did, and I needed you to know." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Rowan, you don't have to say anything back. Don't have to feel the same way. This doesn't change anything about how we live, but I wanted you to know." He reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're not just my responsibility anymore. You're not just the woman I'm protecting. You're everything." The tears spilled over. Clara had spent so long believing she was worthless, believing no one could ever love her, that hearing these words felt like being given permission to breathe. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have for a while now. I was just too scared to say it." Rowan's face transformed. He pulled her into his arms, and this time when he kissed her, it wasn't chaste or brief. It was deep and real and full of everything they'd both been holding back. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. "So what now?" he asked. Clara smiled. "Now we live, for real this time. Not just surviving, actually living." I like the sound of that. They went inside together, checked on Hope one more time. She was sprawled in her crib, completely out, one hand flung above her head, and then, for the first time since they'd married, Rowan followed Clara to her room. To their room now, she supposed. And Clara, who'd spent so long believing her body was something to be ashamed of, let herself be seen. Let herself be loved. Let herself exist fully, without apology, in this space she'd fought so hard to create. The years that followed weren't perfect. Nothing ever was. There were hard seasons and failed crops and animals that died and all the normal struggles of ranch life. Clara and Rowan fought sometimes, sharp words exchanged when they were both exhausted and frustrated. Hope grew into a headstrong child who tested every boundary and questioned every rule. But they made it work. Built something real and lasting out of the wreckage they'd both started with. The ranch prospered. Clara started teaching other women to read, holding classes in her kitchen. Rowan mentored young men who needed guidance, teaching them that strength was about what you protected, not what you conquered. Martha eventually left their father's house and came to live with them for a while. She stayed 3 years, healing, learning who she was outside of their father's shadow. When she finally left, it was to marry a kind man from town and start her own family. But she visited often, and her children grew up alongside Hope, learning what family could be when it wasn't built on cruelty. Clara's father died eventually. They heard about it third hand from someone who'd been in town. Clara waited for grief, or relief, or something, but all she felt was a distant sadness for the man he could have been, if he'd chosen differently. She didn't go to the funeral, didn't feel the need. She'd buried him years ago, in all the ways that mattered. One evening, many years later, Clara sat on the porch watching Hope, grown now, nearly 20, teaching her own daughter to ride. The little girl was fearless, just like her mother had been, laughing as the horse trotted around the corral. Rowan came out and handed Clara a cup of coffee, settling into the chair beside her with a satisfied grunt. "She's good with her," he observed. "Hope, she's a good mother." "She is." Clara watched her daughter, her granddaughter, and felt something settle in her chest. Peace, maybe. Or just the satisfaction of knowing she'd done it. She'd survived. She'd built a life worth living. She'd raised a daughter who was strong and whole and unafraid. "You know what I think?" Clara said softly. "What's that?" "I think the ones who've been hurt the deepest really do love the strongest. You were right about that." She looked at him, this man who'd stood beside her through everything. "We learned how to love because we knew what it felt like not to be loved.
and that made us better at it. Rowan reached over and took her hand, his grip still strong despite the years. Maybe. Or maybe we just got lucky, found each other when we both needed finding. Maybe both. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set, watching Hope and her daughter, watching this life they'd built together. And Clara thought about that girl she'd been, broken, afraid, convinced she was worthless. She thought about how far she'd come, how much she'd survived. And she thought about what she'd learned, that worth wasn't something other people gave you. It was something you claimed for yourself. That family wasn't about blood or obligation, but about who you chose to stand beside. That strength wasn't about never breaking, but about what you did with the pieces after you fell apart.
Hope's daughter squealed with laughter, and Hope caught her, swinging her down from the horse with easy confidence. They walked toward the house together, hand in hand, and Clara saw in them the future she'd fought so hard to create. A future where women weren't punished for existing, where children learned that love was about protection, not possession, where people who didn't fit into neat little boxes could still build lives worth living. It wasn't perfect, would never be perfect, but it was theirs, hard-won and precious and real. And that, Clara had learned, was more than enough.